Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show, it's about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Your Honor. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. A lot of whoa, ooh, woo. Like, there's a lot of moments in this episode that really had me going like, oh, like tense. Let me just kind of break things down. First and foremost, Michael going to Charlie to get rid of the car. First and foremost, I was like, probably should have told Charlie ahead of time why you were trying to get rid of the car. I get it. The less he knows, the less blowback that could potentially come back to you. The less people that are out there that know the truth about the whole situation. But because he didn't correct, because Charlie was like, I get it. You want to get rid of the car because it reminds you of Robert, which that goes like, oh, so there's even more sentimental value to this car because it was his late wife's, Adam's mom's car. So I was like, okay. So that adds a layer to it. So you have Charlie calling up Rudy, a detective, who calls up Little Mo, who gets Kofi. So there's at least 4 degrees of separation from Michael and Adam. So it works out in that regard. But you're like, oh, dude. But then at the same time, Nancy hits up Michael. Yeah, you called me? And he's like, yeah, it's about Robin's car got stolen. I was like, why would you do that? I was like, lie. Say like, hey, because obviously he was working on that shotgun home case. Like, which we know deals with Famale Jones. I'm like, why didn't you just say it was about that case? You wanted her perspective, because he already went down that route, because like he's with Adam and he's like, yeah, he's talking to a lady in that restaurant about it, and then it's like, oh, he's trying to set up an alibi, like, because he figures if it comes down to it, this will happen months later, somebody's going to be coming asking questions, but then it's like, oh, like, this will give Adam a potential alibi, and obviously they go to the cemetery. There's that whole situation with that vet, and he's like, oh, is it for dope or booze? And he was like, neither. He's like, oh, sorry, I only give money to people who are both doing, either it's for booze or dope. And I was like, the fuck is that? And then later on he explains it. It's like, oh, that guy's going to remember me being such a smart ass with him, so he's setting up alibi after alibi. But for Adam, it's like, yesterday was yesterday. But it's like, no, when people are asked about this time, he's like, yeah, when that lady's asked about me, it's going to be like, oh, that the judge came and she's going to remember it's that. She won't remember the specific day. That's what he's hoping for. He's hoping that, by the time, because it'll be months later, people's memories won't be as clear. You won't remember the specific day, but it'll be roundabout enough for, like, obviously they can skew it to be like, okay, what they saw me at the cemetery, yeah, that was me during my wife's, the anniversary of her death, and we were, paying our respects. So, like, they can skew that if the time came. Like, he was setting this up, and obviously Adam was like, no, like, the fact is going above and beyond, going to mom's grave and everything, for him, he felt bad about, because it's like, we're using mom as my alibi, and he thinks that's messed up and effed up, which is kind of messed up and effed up in its own right, but it's just kind of like, damn. But circling back to it, I was like, why did you bring it up to Nancy? Why'd you have to? And then he's just like, you know what? He's like, maybe it's kind of just right, because I couldn't get rid of any of the Nancy stuff. I mean, none of Robin's stuff. We also, like, an article she was writing, so I guess she was a journalist or something. Doesn't really go too much into that, but maybe that's something that will come up later on. But then Nancy's like, no, the fact of the matter is, like, we find out that now it makes more sense about that picture, and probably why that whole situation with Adam, like with why the picture got smashed and the flowers destroyed, is because someone probably went down for her murder. I don't know. They never really specify whether or not someone went down for her murder, or whether or not that person's still out there, but it's still that community of like, nah, fuck that, because basically someone went to rob the store and ended up killing her. So Nancy's using that and being like, fact is, you think that person cared about whether, Robin had a young son at home? So no, whoever stole this car, fuck them. And you're just like, oh shit, your plan is backfiring on so many damn levels. So Nancy's putting in the word like, oh, we'll find this car. Then Kofi's driving along, got the car, which also, side note, he's in a neighborhood where it's like, people are going to notice. I'm going to purely assume that's probably a mainly white neighborhood. Just saying, just because you had the neighbor outside watering, looking at him, he had the hood up, he took the hood down, then he put the hood back up, and then he took it down when the guy on the bike was like, oh, dude, you can't tell me that don't look shady as shit. Especially because some of those neighbors probably know Michael because he's a judge. It was in broad daylight when it was taken, so especially because we know at least one of the neighbors is nosy as hell, was out and about when Adam left that day, and also when he came back, so it's there. So there's all of that. The fact is, Kofi's driving along. He's got that baseball in there. I'm like, oh, please. I was like, well, it's most likely signed with someone's name, but I'm sure there's only a handful. There might be some people that know, hey, Adam, didn't you have a baseball? I don't know if it'll ever, obviously it plays a role in the story, but I'm curious, will it become a bigger thing? Probably not, but it's just like, and Kofi get pulled over, you're like, oh, shit. Because apparently he ran a red light, but then they're also reading about they get word about the stolen car and everything. He threw that baseball down super fast. I was like, why'd you? I was like, you probably don't want cops mistaking you having anything in your hand. And he was going over because I don't. And then the cop pulled a gun on him. I was like, shit. That's one of those moments in the episode that I got tense. I was like, please don't shoot him. Please don't kill him. He's still in the car, but obviously he was told to do this, and he's actually an innocent kid in all of this. Please don't kill him. Please don't kill him. I was like, oh, dude. And just Kofi being like, hey, my hands are here. Please don't shoot me. Literally begging not to be shot. It's like, fuck, dude. It's like, because especially later on, because you find out Kofi's only 17, it's like, shit, dude. Because especially as a 28-year-old, it's like, motherfucker's a kid, dude. So it's like, granted, it doesn't just, it's because it's one of those complicated things. From the outside, you'd be like, well, you're still like, oh, he's a kid, give him another shot. But also from the perspective of the show, we know oh, man, it sucks, And so, obviously, he gets arrested. He's talking to that cop about the sandwich and stuff like that. He's like, oh, yeah, they arrested me on some BS. And, it's more paperwork for you when I bring up all the racist shit, And it's like they were pulling, especially kind of treating him like shit. So it was definitely on some race shit. But then also, interestingly enough, the cop he was talking to was, I was looking at his name and kind of make sure to catch it. Christopher B. Duncan. Obviously, best thing I knew him best from is the Jamie Foxx show. I'm blanking on his character's name. But most recently, I've seen him in, he was a recurring character on Black Lightning for the past 2 seasons, I believe. I think he popped up in season 2. Yeah. Nevertheless, tangents and all that. But, when it was all said and done, though, and he's like, it's like, oh, I'm going to get out of here. And obviously, it's just at every freaking turn, Michael kind of made this a little worse. Because obviously, it's like, oh, yeah, we got the car and everything. And it's like, oh, cool. And even Anthony being like, yeah, we were curious, how he was able to get the car. So he's might have going into your house. And so it's like, nah, I leave it on the tire and everything. I was like, I wasn't 100% sure what he was trying to allude to by setting that up. I don't know what I guess maybe he was trying to alleviate some of the theft to make it not as bad as it looks by being like, oh, it was out there in the open, so yeah, he stole it, but he didn't go as far as breaking and entering by breaking into the house to steal the car, So maybe that's what he was trying to lessen the whole situation. And then there's also the whole thing of, oh, who was the last one who drove the car? He's like, oh yeah, me and Adam, something with his mom said. I was like, right, the anniversary and everything. I was like, oh boy. But that's the problem with a lie. Once you start with one lie, because you also have to keep lies super simple, because lies have to be simple enough that you can remember them, so you don't have to worry about getting caught up in the details and stuff like that. But it's also obviously when you lie about one thing, you have to lie about 2 more things to cover that lie. Then you have to, and it's just lie after lie after lie after lie, and it's like, damn it. So now there's a whole situation. That cop who's working, I think his name is Cusack, who works for Jimmy. Jimmy was like, hey, you find out who did this. So Cusack comes after Kofi, him and his partner or whatever, take him for a ride. You're like, oh, dude, because immediately my stomach sank because I was like, shit, they're going to take him to an isolated place. Jimmy's going to fuck this kid up. Jimmy's going to and it's not going to be something plain and simple a gunshot. He's probably going to take his damn time, especially because we saw him lose his shit on a damn birdcage. I was like, is that foreshadowing what he's going to potentially do to Kofi? That's I was like, dude, come on, this kid does not deserve this. He did one thing. It's like, because especially because we find out he's affiliated, and it's like he was ordered to do one thing, and it's like. And he gets dragged through the mud because it's like, oh, you also are the one that hit and ran over Jimmy. It's like the cops are looking at it from a perspective of oh, you hit and run. Some of them, most of them. Some of them are dirty cops being like, oh, we work for Jimmy and Jimmy wants to settle to find out who killed his son. So it's just one thing after another. This is obviously you can't help but make comparisons because obviously Bryan Cranston being in it. There are Breaking Bad elements where it's just shit just doesn't go right. If anything, it reminds me of Ozark, how just every time something Marty got set in play, oh, it comes back to bite him in the ass in some shape or form because something doesn't go right. And it's just like every time Michael turns around, there's like something screwed up about this situation. And it's just like, oh boy. So there's also this interesting dialogue between that cop and Michael where he was like, hey, you remember me? He's like, yeah, about the dude who was stealing underwear. And he was like, oh, I'm not stealing them off a clothesline. I'm cleaning up the world for something disgusting, blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, yeah, I remember the case. It's like, well, that dude that you said not guilty to, yeah, he went off to rape a woman, 2 women, a 14-year-old, and his whole thing was stuffing their underwear in their mouth. And it's like, Jesus. So trying to make him feel guilty by being like, your decision to tell that guy, hey, he's not guilty, led to that. So it's like, which maybe that plays into something else later on storytelling wise. Maybe that's kind of foreshadowing some stuff. But obviously it was also set up for Michael to say the line of, I judged him on the evidences there, not the monster we fear he might become. It's like, I judged that purely off like, yeah, he might be a pervert and stuff like that, but no one would allocate, maybe he's some pervert, maybe there wasn't enough evidence to really say that he did this, but it's not enough to jump to immediately be like, oh, he's going to rape some people. Like, it's not always a 1-2 with that. Like, a lot of crime isn't just 1-2. Like, just because you smoke marijuana doesn't mean you're going to go and kill somebody type of, but I'm sure someone can break it down psychologically by being like, no, these are the precursors to someone doing that. Like, I'm not well versed in criminology or like psychology to know to go from A to B in that regard. Maybe it is an A to B thing, but to me it just seemed like you went from A to 3. Like, going from like 2 separate, so that's why I'm like, but like I said, I'm not an expert in that. So that was a complicated thing. You had, well, for one, we also found out that the person Adam is in a relationship with, I was like, oh, that's a student. It's like, no, that's your teacher. So it's like, okay, so we own that right now. Okay, which is interesting because there's also a show out called A Teacher on FX, and it's also on Hulu. Kind of about that, so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And basically that subtle conversation where he was basically in front of their entire class, obviously using a famous photographer as a buffer zone, but basically was confessing his love to his teacher. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of messed up, complicated stuff going on right now. So there's that. Adam was looking up stuff about Jimmy and looked at Roscoe's like Facebook page and saw a picture of him, and I think that was him and his sister, I think. And so making him feel guilty. He sees his dad, the cops come in with his dad, and he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's like, hey, son, yeah, someone stole our car and apparently we're involved with a hit and run. And now it's just like everything's going wrong. Adam's feeling guilty because it's like, who's going to take the fall for me? But, Michael's like, it doesn't matter right now. We need to focus on, how many people saw you, because it's like, obviously it's the dude. Obviously he brings up the window wiper dude, the gas station dude, the dude that was behind him blowing the horn at him. But he also left out the person who was actually following you in that black vehicle. There's another group of witnesses. Granted, like, the dude might not remember, but also, like, Adam was, like, hooded up, so it could be anyone. We saw from the security camera it didn't show his face, but who knows, there might be enough of him turned around where it's like you can tell we don't know. We didn't get the full look at what the camera saw, but what we did see, it showed him with like his head back turned and the hood up, so that's kind of covered in that regard. But then also Michael brings up the inhaler, and it's like, yep, that's not there, because we know that Jimmy's dude's got the inhaler, and they're going to run the DNA. Obviously, there's blood on it. It's like, whose blood is it? Because I think at the very least, maybe if they could make it so, like, hey, whoever did this was trying to save his life. It's not going to make it better, but at least it will make the situation, it'll ease it a tiny frame. Because obviously I think that's going to come up in a big part, the whole thing about, because Adam was on the 911 call wheezing. So I think eventually Jimmy's going to hear Adam have a panic attack and start breathing like that, and it's going to click in his head. I think they're already setting that up this far in advance of like how that's going to play out, because he played that tape over and over again, listened to the person wheezing, because he's probably also going to listen to be like, because I don't think he's going to think that was Roscoe. I think he's going to believe, obviously, it's whoever's inhaler it was. But then eventually that's also going to tie into the stuff with Kofi, because it's like, well, Kofi doesn't have asthma or anything like that. He doesn't have an inhaler, so it's definitely not his. Granted, they still need to run the DNA. Adam doesn't seem like he's going to be in the system. I mean, we don't know what he's been in. Because I don't think it works. Because obviously, I don't think it would tie to... I don't know if judges' DNA are in the database. I don't think they would. Like, I think the only people in the database are criminals. I don't think on the justice side of things, like, you'll find police or like law enforcement's DNA in the database. I could be mistaken, but so I don't think there'd be a direct correlation to be like, oh, this DNA is tied to Michael, you know. So we'll see in that regard. Which also, like, I will admit, if you don't know this, my name is Michael, so it's weird to constantly say the name Michael. It's a common enough name, but it still just feels weird because it makes me feel like narcissistic because I'm like, oh, I'm talking about me all the time. Me. Like, I know it's stupid, but it's just funny to think about. But regardless, so now things are kind of screwed on many different fronts. Kofi, like, Cusack and his partner are like, oh, if you're not going to give us the answers, then, because at first they had him handcuffed. I was like, oh, dude, like, I was expecting them to call Jimmy to, like, beat some answers out of him. And, like, I want you to confess what you did. But it's like, they rather get that confession first and then bring Jimmy into the fold. Maybe not. But nevertheless, which is interesting because I guess they figure, like, he's in the system enough where it's like, too many people are connected to this case, so they can't make him disappear. They can't let Jimmy kill him because he was already arrested for this. All the other cops, the good cops that aren't on Jimmy's payroll, were a part of that, so they know, like, if he up and disappear, it's going to look a little suspicious, so they can't do too much. So they had to get the confession out of him. It's like, because they were like, where's the phone? He's like, what? Because obviously he's in that situation where it's like, he's affiliated, so he's like, I'm not going to, like, talk to the police, but also, like, he legitimately has no idea what's going on, so he doesn't know what answers they want. They try to, like, gas him out, like, put him in a car with that hose and everything. I was like, holy shit, are you going to mess around and kill him? Luckily they didn't, but it's like, you can look at that multiple ways. Like, is it lucky he didn't, you know? But then we find out Famale from last episode. I was like, I didn't expect that. I thought that was just going to be like show us who he is as a judge, but also it showed you, like, oh, that's her oldest boy, and it's like, gee, oh man, this is messed up. CB, and that's the complicated thing because it's like you are damning someone else's boy to save your own. Yeah, he might be affiliated, but he did nothing wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. He's in this situation because you called Charlie. Charlie put in a favor, and that led to all of this. Because now in retrospect, too, it makes sense why because Charlie's affiliated. He's some politician, but I think he's the top dog in the Desire gang or whatever. Like, maybe that's how you rule things. You handle things in the streets while also handling things on a political front as well. So he's trying to control the city from both fronts, I think. It's kind of what that says because Maul called up Rudy and Rudy called up Charlie. I think it's that situation where it's like the entire organization doesn't know the top to bottom. So I don't think Mo knows about Charlie. I think only Rudy knows about Charlie because Rudy's the middleman. You know, it's like, well, hell, he might not even be necessarily Desire. He might just be have connections in that regard, or at the very least, maybe that is about just like, hey, this could come back to me. So maybe Charlie has nothing to do with it. I'd assume he does. I'd made that assumption, but who's to say he does? It could just be like, hey, Rudy, I need you to get somebody to do it. Rudy knows some people to take care of some shit for him. So maybe that's what it comes down to, or maybe Charlie knows about Rudy's affiliation to. Once again, it's that type of thing of like, who knows what and when. It's always kind of the big question in these type of situations. So. Kofi gets the call from Mo. It's like, yeah, you're a good loyal soldier, so take the fall. Kofi's like, what? Take the fall for something I didn't do? And it's like, yeah, it's like, he's literally telling you he didn't do it, and you still tell him to take the fall, but because it will come back and blow up in their faces, so that's why he wants to. Also, that, because even I was like, that's super unconventional. That seems super effed up for that officer, the judge, to be like, oh, are you affiliated? And then to strip his, like, that shirt, the top of it. I was like, yo, that's fucked up. Like, you don't, I was about to say, you don't do that. And it's like, oh yeah, you got that tattoo, so you are affiliated, son. And so, like, Kofi has to take the fall because it's like, hey, if you don't take the fall, I can't guarantee the safety of your family. It's like, what the fuck? Because I guess this is their way to make sure if you take the fall for this and making sure that we look after your family, you won't open, because they got you by the balls in this situation and they could press you for anything else Desire gang related, so that's probably why they want him to take the fall and shut his damn mouth. It's what they want him to do, and Kofi does. If it means protecting his family, then and it's a shame, because obviously it's that thing of like, he's a 17-year-old kid. He's trying to be about this life, because I think for him, he's like, probably like, because even Michael has said it last episode that like, hey, they'll come for like, her oldest son, which not even realizing like her oldest son is already about that. But it's like, it's like, it's your kind of your way to, it's the only way you can probably like, make your way in that world, essentially. And it's also like, because I'm sure some people look at it as like, by being affiliated, you're a man. Like and especially to him, it's probably also that thing too of like, I'm a man, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna keep it real, I'm gonna do right by my people, by my family, by doing this, and it's like, but also it's like, you're a 17-year-old kid. Not only are you, who knows how long I'm once again not familiar with the judicial system and all the crimes and how long you get. I have no idea like how long he'd get, but also Jimmy's gonna want that kid dead. So like, you literally got a target on your back. Jimmy can call any number of people in that prison to probably pay someone off to kill that kid if that came down to it. So that's the extra layer. Once again, and the optics of it is even more effed up, because it's like, hey, this white kid gets to get away with it while this black kid suffered a ramification for it. And I think they did that on purpose. Like that, I think that's the deeper commentary I want to believe, but it is that thing of like, Adam's in a position to have a dad who's a judge who knows the law enough to know like, oh, what kind of questions will be asked, and what, to build up enough in an alibi for his son, by creating these circumstances of someone else suffering from it. And Adam was there to see that. And even to the point at the end of the episode, he's standing where Kofi was, because it was like, that should be me standing here for my crimes, and someone else, some kid is paying for it, especially, it sucks because Famale came to him in this episode being like, hey, I know you're not the judge in this case, but please do something for my son. And it's like him saying no, but then he gets his buddy Lee to look into it, which obviously there's some history there, because she was a lawyer he was going to call up to defend Adam to like soften the blow. But now he's like, oh no, I just wanted to kind of take you out. But he wants her to defend Kofi, because he wants to at least alleviate some of his guilt, because that kid is getting the book thrown at him. And obviously the kid's pleading guilty, because Michael probably realizes his circumstances, so it's like, of course he's going to plead guilty. So it's like, okay, I got to make sure this kid gets the best defense possible. And it's like, which is obviously counterintuitive, because you want him, because sadly Michael, he doesn't want it, but he needs that kid to take the fall so that everything gets pulled off, like any attention towards his case nothing gets looked into further. There's also that, but also it's his guilt, because it's like, especially because he was, helping out with Famale's case last episode. Now, like, to be literally damning her son to save your own, it's like his conscience, just like Adam, it's eating away at him. So once again, fear of the monsters you become, There's also, while they're like figuring out, Adam and Michael are figuring out that whole thing, obviously the dog is still scratching for that evidence to hit away, and you're like, all right, how's that going to come back to screw you over, because it's still out and about. Circling back to the lead thing really quickly, there's something there where she was like, me handling this case is going to be complicated. He's like, I know. She's like, but despite my circumstances, you want me to take this case? And I'm like, what is that about? Like, does she have like family tied to the Desires or something like that? Maybe that's what that is. Like, because she made it seem like it would almost be like, she almost made it seem like it'd be a conflict of interest. Not necessarily, maybe not as strongly as that, but she just seemed like it'll look away, or at least my circumstances will make this complicated. I'm curious, maybe next episode we'll find out about that. But yeah. And then on top of that, because all this Desire stuff came out, Jimmy and them are looking at this like, oh, this wasn't no simple hit and run. This was the Desire striking back at us, because I think one of Jimmy's people beat up someone from their group. So he's looking at it like, oh, this was a tit for tat situation. It was an accident situation, but like I said, everything is blowing up. So now a hit and run that was an accident, but obviously got covered up, it's now going to blow up into a legitimate gang war. So it's like, shit's going to blow up out of the wazoo. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.